Hi, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Dr. Heidemann, for being here. If your cell phones are on, please turn them off so that they don't interfere with the presentation. And Dr. Heidemann retired as Associate Professor of Architecture and Director of the Graduate Program in Historic Preservation at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. So clearly she's been involved in historical stuff for a very long time. She's a Michigan registered professional community planner and fellow of the American Institute of Certified Planners. And she's going to tell us today about doings in Presque Isle County. And if you have more to add, thank you and welcome.
Ron, is this mic working? We hope it is. All right. Well, we've had some exciting times setting up the electronics, and a whole team of people was necessary to help do it. I'm going to start with a joke because that reminded me so much of my mother, who passed away at age 101. We used to drive her around in her elderly years. And when my husband got his first car that had all the electronic controls that told you instant miles per gallon and how far your car could go without running out, that's normal. How the oil and the washer fluid was doing. And he was trying to impress my mother. And he went on and on for quite a while. And she eventually stopped him and said, "Carl, your car has more answers than I have questions." And that was the last time he talked about the electronics in his car. I have to tell this machine that I understand. There we go. So yes, we're going to talk about the New Deal today. And I know that that's not the most famous time in history because I taught young people at Ball State. And when I said the words New Deal, they have this blank look on their face. I don't think this group will be quite as blank, but we'll talk about it in everyday terms, because you might ask why I got interested in it myself. I was born in 1950, so it's not like I was there at the time. Come on in. We moved up to Rogers City from the metro area in 1988. So we've only been here 35 years, and therefore we're still new and non-local. But I noticed, because I am interested in architecture and design, there were quite a few New Deal structures in Presque Isle County. I kept finding more and more of them, and I thought to myself, what's that all about? So I had an opportunity to take some classes in the Traverse City area on weekends in historic preservation, and that was my avocation at the time. So I decided, well, heck, I'm going to use the requirement of doing a class paper to research this New Deal stuff and find out really what's going on. So that was the genesis of my interest in Presque Isle County New Deal sites. But I do want to take a minute to talk about the setting. And the setting of the New Deal should be more familiar to us because we've gone through a lot of problems economically in recent years. We all know, I hope, that the New Deal officially started with the stock market crash in 29. And then there was an exciting run on banks. Now, I never thought I'd see a run on banks in my lifetime, but we've recently had one. And we know the panic it put people into and how quickly a response was made to that. Well, the problem at the start of the Depression was that the then President Hoover really didn't do anything, or not much, in response, because he believed in what's called a market correction, that the system of capital would correct itself, and there might be a little blip, but it would get over quickly. Well, that went on for several years and it didn't disappear, didn't self-correct. And in fact, 25% of the labor force was unemployed, which is unbelievable. And the ones that were employed were suffering from having their wages and hours slashed. And this effects of the Depression hit the middle class. Previous downturns had primarily affected whatever the lower class is supposed to be, but this hit the middle class, and they were shocked to be in the problems themselves. And we probably, many of us have seen in our history books, some of the agricultural problems, that there were more agriculture products than could be consumed. Part of that actually dates back to World War I, when farmers were asked to increase production to help satisfy the demand during the war. Well, they plowed up every inch of ground, whether or not it was prime agricultural soil. So one of the many outcomes of that was the Dust Bowl, because really they were farming desert land. So you can see these problems are compounding one on the other. So Roosevelt campaigned for the presidency in 1932, and his platform included fixing some of these problems. He wanted reform of the financial and banking system. He wanted to give farmers support for their prices. He suggested work relief could help people unemployed, but work relief shouldn't be just make work, that the work, in fact, should create public works that the whole society would benefit from having. He also instituted employment protections that we take for granted today, which is wage rate controls and a 40-hour work week, which was unheard of at the time. He also wanted to protect natural resources, and he wanted to institute Social Security for elderly people who could no longer work but needed a source of income. So that's quite a lot of, shall we say, promises. The Civilian Conservation Corps is the group we'll be talking about primarily today, although there are many, many other programs. The CCC was created in the famous first 100 days of FDR's administration. And that solved several of the problems he had raised in his campaign. One, it provided work relief. Two, it was focused on public works. And three, it was addressing natural resource conservation. Now, everybody knows that the CCC hired young men from 18 to 25 was the primary proposal when it was initially created in 1933. They were paid $1 a day, $30 a month. $25 of the pay was sent back home to the parents, to the family. So the actual enrollee got $5. But what did that matter? Because you had your room and board covered, and you were often in an isolated area where you couldn't buy anything anyway. But what's not well known about the CCC is that it also hired veterans. Now, at that time, we're talking about veterans of World War I. Of course, it wasn't labeled one at the time. It was the Great War. So these were not spring chickens. These were middle-aged guys. And in fact, they also hired veterans of the Spanish-American War. Wow. So how did that come about? I myself, until I started this research, I wasn't aware of that, period. I did not know about that, and I never read it in a textbook. Well, those World War I vets were promised by a grateful society a bonus. There was a catch to it. The bonus wasn't to be awarded until 1945, which was quite a time after the war. Well, the Depression comes and people are unemployed. And the veterans, mind you, are middle-aged or older. And you know what happens to middle-aged or older people? They are not real hot prospects on the job market. And some of these guys had problems that we now define as PTSD, mental health problems. They might be alcoholics. They might have their family, broken by their problems. So these guys wanted their bonus like now, when it would be useful to them to get through the Depression. So in Hoover's administration in 1932, to 20,000 veterans marched on Washington. They came by jalopies. They came by jumping on railroad cars. They came by walking. 20,000 veterans, talk about Occupy Wall Street, occupied DC. And they set up the largest Hooverville known to that time. What's a Hooverville? That was camps of unemployed guys that were developed, in cardboard boxes or a scrap wood or tents or whatever. But here they constructed a Hooverville right in the middle of DC, which tended to get the president's attention. But Hoover did not respond very well. And after that camp had been going for a few months, he got fed up and sent in the army to clear him out. And actually, an army person torched one of the tents and set up a huge conflagration and literally burned out that camp and dispersed the people. Well, they didn't have TV, but news got out, and that was not well received socially. So that violence that occurred during a campaign year is one of the many things that helped elect Roosevelt. But guess what? They came back in 33. They hadn't gotten their bonus. Oh, by the way, the bonus proposal had gone to the House during the Hoover administration and been approved by the House, but it was rejected by the Senate. So they didn't get the bonus. So now here the protesters come back. And I'm a planner. And a lot of planners got employed by Roosevelt in his brain trust. So now the planners go over there and help lay out a functioning city with water and places to cook food. And it was much more organized, and they more or less were welcomed to the DC. And who did they send over to talk to them? But Eleanor. So she went over and we didn't talk policy at all, just walked around and met the people and heard their stories and actually sang World War I songs with them. Did they get their bonus? No. But they did get eligibility to join the CCC. So making veterans eligible for the CCC program was a compromise because they could join and get paid. They could get hired and paid for their work. So how did those camps actually run? Well, the camps were built by the Army, generally speaking, on state or federal land. They were built with modular structures, very intended to be temporary, because they were moved often. If a gang came in and did a lot of work in a particular area and was finished, they picked the buildings up and moved them someplace else. Each camp housed roughly 200 men. It wasn't just barracks and a mess hall. They had to actually create a little city. So there was a hospital, classrooms. Oh, classrooms. People could take classes in the CCC, classes in reading, because a lot of these unemployed folks were basically illiterate, and classes in skills. And the skill classes would be needed. For instance, we need to do some masonry. I don't know how to do that. That the CCC would hire a locally experienced man to lead the crew and teach the enrollees how to do this, whatever tasks they needed to do. Enrollments were 6 months. So July 1st, 1933 was when the CCC began in earnest. And that's called the first enrollment period. So you had to requalify every 6 months. And 2 years was, in theory, the maximum to be on the public dole. How did you become eligible? Well, the counties kept a list. And I found in the Presque Isle County Advance a little story about the lists. And people would be taken from the eligible list, and you were classified by, did your family need the help? Were you the right age? And each county was given allotment for so many places in the CCC. Now, you would think that the people in Presque Isle County would be put in Presque Isle County, and that's not the case. Once you signed up, you didn't know where you went. And it wasn't typically near your house. So in fact, most of the people that served in the camp in Presque Isle County came from downstate. The funding for the camps came from the federal government. However, the projects came from the state. So the feds were working with administrators at the state level to figure out where to put people and what projects to assign them. Now, project number one was reforestation, which we've all heard about. And also going along with that, forest fire protection. The CCC built roads and utilities. What kind of utilities? Telephone lines, electric lines. They also set about doing some natural resource work, fisheries improvements, and they built all kinds of facilities for parks, including campgrounds and trails and park buildings. And you'll see quite a lot of that in Presque Isle County. Well, why did Michigan especially want CCC camps? Well, we were a big lumber boom place, and the forests were decimated. They were logged over, and the loggers just left the slash. And there's a number of very famous fires in our area. The slash was very combustible, and Michigan suffered a wave of forest fires multiple times with this slash burning. In our area, we have the Metz fire that killed a whole lot of people who couldn't get out of town fast enough and were roasted inside of a boxcar. Horrible. That slide picture is there to show you what timber cutover land looked like, which was a big mess. Before the Depression hit, Michigan had already started a state forest system. How did they do that? Buy land? No. They got it on tax reverted land that had been lumbered. So the lumber barons tried to sell the idea that, well, they'll take off the timber and that'd make it much easier to farm. But farming in the North Country is kind of dicey because you don't have a very long growing season, and the soils in many cases are kind of crappy for ag. So the poor farmer would buy it, try to get a farm going, and wouldn't be able to make it and wouldn't pay the taxes. When the taxes weren't paid, that's when they went back to the community, and that's called tax reverted property. So a lot of that property was assembled, and 2/3 of today's state forest land was tax reverted. That's huge. That's huge. Also, because of this problem of the cutover, Michigan was already experimenting with reforestation and had one of the earliest reforestation stations over by Higgins Lake. And so they had, can I say, the infrastructure, they had the lands, they had the experimentation, and they also had started, for some of the primo sites, a state park system. Now, it's kind of ironic that a lot of the state parks were on land donated by lumber barons. And that includes Fletcher State Park. We'll talk about that in a minute. And Heft, Paul Heft donated land for Heft State Park. And that state park system started in 1919. But the Depression hits. The states don't have any money to continue with the experimentation, to do anything with the state park. So you have the land with very few, if any, amenities on it. So why Presque Isle County as a hotbed for CCC? Well, at that time anyway, it was the only county in Michigan that had 3 state parks. Onaway State Park was actually on land that had been a city park for the city of Onaway. It's on Black Lake. And then the 2 lumber baron parks, Fletcher and Heft. And of course, Presque Isle County had a huge amount of state forest land. And it also had lakes and streams that had been pummeled by environmental issues during the Depression. And it had more or less friendly communities, small communities. Not every community wanted a bunch of unemployed guys to camp out near their place. So that's another reason that these camps were usually located in a buffer zone in state land, removed from communities themselves. But hey, the communities were full of business people that were having a hard time during the Depression. And it suddenly occurred to them, wow, there's 200 people here. We can sell them stuff. We can sell them commodities. We can get our locally experienced men to help them out. This might work out great. So Camp Black Lake was established in that first period, July 1, 1933. Wow. 3 camps were actually started in Presque Isle County. Now, how would they get a camp up instantly? Well, they often started in tents. So the Army would, use old supplies from World War I, surplus, and come in, establish a tent camp, and then the enrollees would build these modular structures. So use enrollees' labor from the get-go. Also, Camp Black Lake lasted almost the entire period. The CCC was disestablished in 1942 in the onset to World War II, but Camp Black Lake went from 1933 to 1941, which was kind of amazing. And it also is amazing that it started as a veterans camp. It began, and in its 9 years of life, was only 1 year where they had young people there. Otherwise, it was solid veterans. Now, this is very confusing to many people, including myself initially. Why is it called Camp Black Lake when it's sitting on Occeoc Lake? Isn't that a little confusing? Well, it turns out that the camps were named for the state forest in which they were located. At that time, the state forest lands in that whole region were called Black Lake State Forest. Now it's called the Mackinac State Forest. So the old name doesn't persist anymore and confuses people even more. Was this summer only? No, they worked year round. And believe you me, those flimsy little buildings weren't a whole lot of fun to be in the winter. The slide there is an aerial of the camp. Let's see if we can just point out, here's the Occeoc Lake Road. And here coming to the camp from US 23 is Camp Road. That makes sense, right? The old entrance was over here, but they shut that off. The old entrance would have come in and come across this field. So here's the Army headquarters. And straight south from headquarters is a pathway. And you see a pair of barracks. There used to be 6 barracks. Now there's 3. So there used to be 2 in here and 1 more here. You need a lot of space to hold 200 guys. Here's the mess hall. That's very important. But a lot of the outhouses or outlying facilities are super important too. Here's an extant garage. And here's an oil house. They had a lot of fuel for their equipment. And you didn't want to have that anywhere near living quarters. Oh, no, go back. There we go. Hidden in the bush out here, and we don't even have it labeled. Oh, yeah, here it is. Hospital. Well, that's a little cottage. And we all thought, when I say we, the county, the support groups, the 4-H, everybody used the place, that had always been a caretaker place. Well, heck, the Army was the caretaker, and they had a spot. Turns out that was the camp hospital. We'll see some pictures of that because it's real cute. It overlooks the lake. Very nice place. And down here in the left-hand corner is Occeoc Lake. How do we know how to label these things? We discovered, and you can look at this later because you sure can't see it now, a 1937 site plan that was actually intended to be a planting plan to vegetate and improve the looks of the campground. And so that's how we found out that the caretaker's place was actually a hospital, because it was late. Found out there were a number of buildings that have been subsequently removed. So not everything that was there. And primarily there were a lot of Army warehouses and sheds. And we believe that this site functioned as a kind of a distribution center and area. And then take it out from there. So here's some pictures of how it actually looked back in the day. There's the mess hall all set up for dinner. And you see on the right-hand side, the kitchen crew. You'll notice they're not kids. So here's some pictures of the middle-aged guys doing their thing. Here's a picture of the library. How nice. And here's where you spent your $5 at the commissary, the little store. By the way, the people with the families, the veterans, they got to keep the whole amount. They didn't have to. Here's a photo of the Army Administration Building. And you see the temporary nature. That the siding on that is tar paper with battens on it. And that was the standard siding. There were a few places that were more deluxe, but that was the typical way it was done. And there were not shingles on that roof. It was rolled roofing, which is to say fancy, more sturdy tar paper on the roof. So a lot of money was not spent on these facilities. Now we see the inside of that office, again, with one middle-aged guy. One guy could be a little younger. And now you get a view of the campus, which was really helpful. Between that and the site plan, we were able to see what buildings were there and since have gone. The building on the right was by far the most elaborate barracks. And it had an office in one end, and that was to be the technical service facility for all the forest work in the region. And that was built in 38. And sadly, that doesn't exist anymore. But you can see again, tar paper with the battens on it. Yeah. Oh boy. No, I'm so glad you asked. I didn't set her up. So, you know, Rogers City, small town. Everybody knows everything. This group called Friends of the Outdoor Center was trying to save the camp and improve the camp, because of course, different groups, it had to be saved twice, once when the state was going to tear it down and once when the county was going to tear it down. So we tried to get stuff in the press. Well, there were almost no visuals at all of the camp. We had the one picture of the kitchen crew, that was about it. And we had this one of that building, that's all we had. So meanwhile, I'm trying to do some research on whether this thing would be eligible for the National Register, to also say, hey, don't tear it down, this is important. So these things are going on. And our president, Chris Sorgenfrey, which some of you people may know or have heard of, went to church one day. And at church, one of her friends had a package of 10 8x10 black and white photos of the camp, which is these photos that I'm showing you. Turns out he had gone to a yard sale, okay, for a deceased person. And somebody there had wanted a massive wooden frame, like a photo frame with glass and wood and very nice. And it had all these photos in it, which you can imagine 2 rows of 8x10, that was a pretty big frame. So he didn't want the pictures. He pulled the pictures out and waved them around at the yard sale and said, anybody want these? And this parishioner just happened to be there and grab them and bring it to church and gave them to Chris. Needless to say, we had them scanned and we have a copy in the Historical Museum and the library. Meanwhile, I'm doing my little research on the National Register, and I'm reading all the old stories from the advance. And I read an article about all the improvements that are being done at the camp and how the camp's going to have an open house and invite everybody in to see the improvements. And luckily, they had a professional photographer come up from the Roscommon camp who had taken 11 professional 8x10 pictures. And the idea was to put them in a frame and hang it in the library. Wow. I don't know where the 11th one went, because we only have 10. but now we have the name of the photographer, the date of the photos, and verification. That's what happened. So that's amazing. That's amazing. Like 39. Yeah. Okay, moving forward, here's what the place looks like today. Straight on, you see the mess hall, and to the right, you see two of the bunkhouses. Okay. What happened to the board and batten? Well, if you're going to put 4Hers in there, it needs to be a little bit warmer. And why keep it the drab color? So those changes were made, which really helped the usability of the buildings. But some of the historical people would say, don't look historic to me. So that becomes an issue later. Oh, also right in the middle, you see a flagpole. Every CCC camp had a flagpole and an assembly area, because after all, we're talking Army, right? That set this up. By the way, they were in old World War I uniforms too. Here's the inside today. And actually it looks nice, but it looks very unchanged from when, you know, that photo is the area where the old guys were cooking supper. And then there's a dining hall. So you definitely know you're in a camp building. And there's the inside of the bunkhouse. And to the right is that charming little hospital. And that sunroom is where you would be laid up and be able to get fresh breezes from across the lake. So that's pretty cool. So now we're going to leave the camp and we're going to go out to show you the sites that the CCC built in Presque Isle County, of which there are many. So first, my favorite is Hef State Park. You see a beautiful picture window view of the lake, but all of that landscaping and all that preparation of the beach was done by the CCC. But that's a view of it you get from the picnic pavilion. In the center bottom, that's one slide of the picnic pavilion. And on the right-hand side showcases some of the masonry work. It's absolutely a gorgeous building. On the top middle, there's a little garage. It does, you know, nothing to write home about, right? That was the first building built by the CCC at Hef State Park. Why is that important? Well, it was 1933. The whole business was just starting. Job number one was reforestation. But back there at Higgins Lake, they hadn't ramped up and they didn't have enough trees to plant. So they had to raise up the seedlings, and so they couldn't start reforestation. So they said, go out to the park and build a garage. So that's what they did. And what I love, I don't know if you can actually see, but on the back of the garage, there's a little lean-to, little punch out. Well, that had to be added because the later cars were bigger. So they had to add on to it. And the bottom left is a restroom. So a lot of the things they built were just very functional. And of course, they built the water systems out there and the sidewalks and the pathways so that people could use the park. The parkland was there, but it was naked. Onaway State Park. On the left, there's a beautiful log and stone bathroom. On the right, well, in the center is a little sign showing the way to the Bluff Trail, which takes off from the campground and goes up on the stone way above the lake. And so then the little shelter building is at the top of that trail. And it's a beautiful scenic. There was a duplicate of that on the other side of the park, which was vandalized and burned to the ground. So, and now we're going to talk a minute about Fletcher State Park, because it's now run by Alpena County as Sunken Lake County Park. Guess what, Alpena people? That's in Presque Isle County. You can't get to the entrance without going into Alpena County. And rumor has it that it was given to Alpena County because Presque Isle County didn't want it, which I believe 100%. Fletcher State Park. Fletcher gave the land to the state as a state park, and only much later after World War II, was it transferred to the county for use as a county park. But looking at those buildings, you know darn well that was CCC. It's got CCC written all over it. But I found records too in the latter part of the CCC period about crews going over to build these buildings. So what else did the CCC? Well, eventually there was enough forest seedlings that they could do their reforestation. And there's pine plantations all over our county. In the less developed portions of the state forest lands, there's a lot of rustic campsites and a lot of trails, and the CCC built them. Some of those are just gorgeous. That one at Tomahawk Lake is just a fantastic place to camp. Little known, it was a CCC that thought it'd be great to have a trail going down to the bottom of the sinkholes. And so they had the first version of the sinkhole pathway. This brings up the idea of the New Deal and Michigan to rework Northern Michigan as a tourist destination. Mind you, the lumber was gone. It wasn't all that great for farming, but what about tourism? So a lot of these projects were definitely oriented to draw people up. And road tripping and camping was kind of new. And so a lot of this was done, the road construction by the state, Mackinac Trail, just to get people to the bridge, and the northern regions was going on at the same time. But the idea was the economy had failed in the area. What can we do? We're going to change the economy and make it stronger in a different way. Now, there were a lot of New Deal agencies, CCC not the only one. I put up this poster because it amuses the heck out of me. The whole thing about acronyms for agencies, which to this day we're cursed with, really started with the CCC. And they would use a 3-letter acronym. So one person, historian of the CCC, developed a periodic table of New Deal programs. So you could look at NLB, NRA, PWA, TVA, and he's arranged them in associated groups, just like the periodic table. And on the backside of that poster, those things are explained. But I went to a class on New Deal, and the instructor had that, and I begged him to take it home with me. So you can come look at it later. So anyway, we'll talk about work progress administration. We have a lot of that too in Presque Isle County. Our beautiful little post office was built by the WPA. Famously, WPA constructed post offices often had murals by local artists, and ours does. Very valuable, very, very beautiful. The subject for the murals was frequently local. And so we have a mural of the boat harbor, of the quarry harbor, with the big boats coming in, the tugboat in the forefront. So if you're up in Rogers City, stop in and see the whole thing. It's fantastic. Also, the WPA, in cooperation with the CCC, built a lot of airports. And there was an airport at Rogers City, very primitive. So they wanted to upgrade that for modern aircraft. And a lot of the groundwork literally was done by the CCC, but the buildings and so forth were, and the layout was done by the WPA. And you see on the right-hand side, the Presque Isle County Airport, which still exists. It's not used right now, but you can get to it and see it, which is quite fantastic. Those 8 door panels are telescoping, and they're running on tracks, and you push them all the way back so that the airplane wings can get out. The most unusual thing about the Rogers City field is an aerial sign with Rogers City spelled out in stacked rocks. So each letter is about 6 feet across, and the letters are about 3 or 4 stacked stones, about knee high. And of course, you didn't have the radio communications. And there's never, even now, there hasn't been a tower at Rogers City. So literally, this told the aviator where the heck they were. And you see that rock arrow? It points north, of course. So that rock sign could orient passing pilots. Isn't that cool? You can also get to the Rogers City sign. It keeps getting overgrown with juniper. So every once in a while they have to hack that down. And boy, did the State Preservation Agency get excited about that. They redid the Rogers City Airport with federal money, I don't know, 15 years ago. And they had to do a resource investigation. And both the old county hangar and the aerial sign were determined to be individually eligible for the National Register. So the county couldn't tear it down. And they're not using it. And they're letting nature take its course, but they weren't allowed to tear it down. This is my favorite aviation site. For those of you who know the county, if you look at the top slide, right up here on this point is Hammond Bay Labs, where they do all the research on lamprey. And that was, of course, a life-saving station before the lab took it over. All right, so the CCC built, with WPA input, this an emergency landing field. Why there? Well, it was state land, state forest land. If someone should be injured in a maritime incident, they would be able to bring a plane in and fly them out of there. Whoops, I got to go back. So here, if you can see that little X, that's all the emergency landing field was. A cleared area with no trees, and they installed a concrete X to say, here's the place where you land. And that concrete X is still there. I read about them building it, and then I had to go to Google Earth and see it. And then, okay, Carl, jump in the car. We're going out to find the X. That's really fun. Okay, rural electrification administration. Of course, Presque Isle County had no electric in the outlying areas. So they formed a co-op. And actually, they were the first co-op to get electrified. And where did they run the line to? Right down to Alpena to get the power off the Fletcher Dam. So in Posen today, you can go. This was the site of the first electric pole in Presque Isle County. So that's pretty exciting. So that was the past, and now the present. The county did receive the site about 20 years ago now, when the state wanted to tear it down and make it into a rustic campground because it didn't have need for the buildings. So the county rose up and said, that's a travesty because all our kids have gone to camp out there. We want to keep it. And so they got it, 17 acres of ground and all the buildings. And they run it as an outdoor center. Because of the confusion about Black Lake Camp and all that, they renamed it Akiak Outdoor Center, which makes much more sense, of course. And it started really primarily to be a place for 4-H to come for their summer camps. And it still is, but there's fewer 4-Hers and they stay for less time. So we're trying to get more adult programs going. The lady with the basket is my sister-in-law. So the Friends are starting to try to make a craft center in some of the buildings to get the older people in there. And on the right was the one barracks building that hadn't been painted. They ran out of paint was the word. So last year we bought the paint and repainted that one building so it would match. This is the original garage. And when the roof of this was caving in, the county decided it wanted to tear the garage down and put up a pole barn. And I said, over my dead body, okay. Tell you what, I think it's register eligible. You don't. I'm going to write the state. They have a quickie process that they'll tell us whether that's likely to be eligible or not likely eligible. And if it's likely eligible, the building should stay and we'll fix it. If it's not eligible, go ahead and tear it down. Well, of course it's eligible. So the Friends prepared a grant application and we put in our sweat equity as part of the match, and we maintained the really cool garage. And you can see those hand-built doors, which I just think are spectacular. And now, yes, we are listed in the National Register of Historic Places. How did that happen? Well, the pandemic. So the camp had to shut down and I got furloughed. Nobody was doing anything. And bored out of my mind, I started writing the National Register nomination and submitted it in May and didn't hear a thing back till November. So between May and November, we wrote the New Deal tour guide for Presque Isle County. Why? Well, we'd started giving bus tours and people loved them. Hop on the bus. We're going to go all over the county and see all these sites in person. It's really cool. Well, during COVID, we couldn't do it. So we wrote up a guide of all the sites and sold it as a fundraiser. And I do have copies. This is not to shake you down, but there are copies here if you want. They're $10. And then you can do your own tour because there is a map. And here's the map. So this is the centerfold of the guide. What's interesting to me is you see all those little trees. That's where there are still red pine plantations standing that were put in. And I took that from information at the Atlanta State Park office that still had record of all the plantings. The other green areas, the green areas are showing current state forest lands in Presque Isle County, but a lot of the wood that was planted has already been long ago harvested. So the trees show you where it still is. A lot of what was planted is jack pine, which when they cut it, they clear cut it, use it for pulp. But the red pine is selectively harvested and tends to last longer. So I also brought a lot of materials for you, some brochures about the camp. There's some brochures about what the Friends have been doing, but you are welcome to take. If you're interested in history, which I know you are, or you wouldn't be here, please be aware that the upcoming Michigan History Conference, September 22nd to 24th, is going to be right in Roscommon, and they're focusing the whole thing on the CCC. And that's where the CCC Museum is. The CCC Museum has all original real equipment, but the building is a reconstruction, and it was built by alumni of the CCC, but that was the kids that were alumni. You know, the alumni of the veterans camp were dead long ago. But one of the tours is going to take you to the original site of the CCC camp, where there are only things like foundations and so forth. So I'm excited about that. And also last year, the New Deal tour was the cover picture and story for the Chronicle, which is a member magazine. So those are up there if you want. So now I would entertain any questions or comments or thoughts that you have.
What's the camp? No, or I think I remember going to the 4-H.
Oh yeah, that would be it. Yep.
Yeah, and we slept in there, it's sort of around it.
There's no round in anything. It's all those barracks buildings.
That's an Onaway, right? The 4-H camp. Or near it.
Well, this camp is near Onaway.
You know, I've been there, but I can't remember how or why. But
Yeah, it's maybe 7 or 8 miles out of Onaway, but it's in the backcountry. It's on Onkiak Lake.
One more question. Is the long run that's tall, the CCC project?
It is not. It was built before that. Well, I don't. Yeah, I don't know the date, but it isn't a CCC. It was actually built locally. I have a friend whose father participated in that, but no, it isn't actually. I was getting it confused with the Behringer Township Hall, which is on Tonhall Road, which is the route you take to get to the camp, which was also, I mean, stone buildings are all around, and CCC didn't do every one of them. Other questions, comments?
Because my mom, we were talking about this last night, and her mom and grandmother, my great grandmother, who I remember, I don't remember that, right, Mom? Right. Yeah, they would go out there and cook for the bird watchers, and she went out there a lot.
It's a beautiful site. And when it's not rented, it's a county park. You can walk around. In fact, it's a real hot spot for ice fishing. So people are out there in the winter. So, feel free. And that's the nice thing about this tour. Every single one of the sites that I talked about is on public land or public property, and you can go see it. It's not a problem, which is really cool. And a lot of people tell me that they cooked for 4-H groups out there. Yeah. And, it's not called an outdoor center for nothing. We have all kinds of groups, but many nature related state forest land, and you're on the lake. In fact, in another week or so, Huron Pines Conservation Group is going out with kayaks on the lake and showing people how to harvest invasive plants on the lake. So we encourage that, and really COVID almost killed the camp. So we're trying to get people interested in going out there and using it, because the rents go back to support the property. Nobody's making any money off that. Yeah.
Have you worked in conjunction with the conservation club? Seems like our grandson went with the conservation club one time. They had a camp.
Well, the site is open for rental. So the county runs it, and you make your reservation through MSU Extension Office in Presque Isle County. So you pay your money to take the property over. So,
Cooking facilities.
oh yeah. Well, you can imagine it's a facility for 200 people. In fact, one of the friends' projects recently was to replace the 1933 stoves, because nobody knew how to light them anymore. You had to light the pilot light. Nobody could do it. A lot of frustration. So there's brand new commercial stoves in there. And it's completely outfitted with dishware and all that jazz for 100 people.
And about how much would the cost be?
Yeah, there's a cost thing over there. You can pick it up if you're interested.
Well, it sounds wonderful.
It is. And it is not free, but a lot less expensive than many overnight camps are, which is the whole point. So the kids in our area have a place to go that doesn't bankrupt their parents.
I just want to say again, too, I don't know how lucky we could get to have you and Carl move to Presque Isle, but thank you for everything, because this would all be gone if it
Well,
wouldn't
thank
be.
you.
Yep.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Appreciate it. All right, we'll shut down the electronics and people can wander around and see these wonderful items on the wall. Take me off the screen.
Very good presentation.
Thank you.